Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to have two great guests with us tonight. Um, First, I'm going to introduce Catherine Breed. For those of you who don't know, she's a highly decorated and accomplished swimmer and a member of the Dolphin Club. She's Her career started in when she was in high school and then in college at Cal. And some of her more recent accomplishments as an open water marathon swimmer um, include records she's broken for swims across Lake Tahoe and across Monterey Bay. And she is a well-known and beloved member of the Dolphin Club, and she'll be speaking with our extra special guest tonight, Naji Ali, who is a member of the South End Club, our beloved friends next door. He's also a total immersion swim coach, which I'm sure he'll talk about more tonight, and a marathon swimmer. And he's also the host and producer of a podcast, Crossing the Lane Lines, which is dedicated to giving voice to the Black swim community by connecting with coaches, swimmers, authors, and activists, and seeks to inform the public about the rich aquatic history of the Black diaspora. And I am absolutely excited to have them both here tonight, and I'll let them take it away.
Yay. I'm so excited. When I was asked to do this, I was like, Naji and I are, we talk often for a swim that we're planning, which we'll talk about later, but it's kind of fun to be in this role with you. Naji, you started swimming at 43, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so you were an adult and you wanted to learn specifically how to swim for ocean swimming. And I listened to your interview with Shannon House Keegan, which I recommend to everyone, Marathon Swim Stories. And your interest and love for the ocean started in a pretty unique way. You were an assistant on a marine biologist boat at Scripps. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that experience and what about it shaped you to be the swimmer you are today.
Sure, great. Well, thank you for having me today. That all started when I was 13 years old. I got a job working as an assistant for a marine biologist at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. I grew up down in San Diego, California, in an inner city neighborhood. And he was a wonderful man. He taught me so much about marine biology, and I really enjoyed learning from him. For me, I'm a hands-on person, so I'll click a lot better if you show me directly as opposed to talk to me about it in books. And several months into the job, about several weeks into the job, he asked me if I wanted to go out into the ocean to catch albacore tuna and bring them back in captivity. Up until that point, which was the late 70s, it had never been done before. And I thought, wow, this will be awesome. I want to do that. So I went home, I asked my mom, she said, yeah, that would be a great idea. And about a few days later, we were on a boat going out 20 miles offshore. And as we all know, the chances of having flat, what we would consider flat, obviously, water 20 miles offshore is almost virtually impossible to happen. But that day it did, and it was really hot. And after we had gotten these two albacore tuna and put them in these specially designed tanks, one of the crew members said that he wanted to go for a swim. So he strips down to his trunks, which he had on underneath his pants, and jumps off the boat. And I'd never seen anybody do this before. So I race over to the side. I'm watching this guy swim around. He's doing the crawl. He's doing backstroke, breaststroke, a little butterfly for about 15, 20 minutes. And he comes back on the boat and he's toweling off. And I walk up to him and I said, oh, wow, that's really cool, man. I'm wondering if you could teach me about that. And the guy puts his arm around me and he laughs and he says, kid, Black people don't swim. And everybody on the boat laughed. And I laughed out of embarrassment because I didn't want to be the butt of the joke. I just kind of walked off and was just devastated. And I didn't bring up that conversation to anybody. Didn't even think about it until 30 years later. So that's essentially the story of how I first, came in contact with the ocean. I had always had a fascination with it, but I fell in love with it before that incident. And after that, I was just determined. I just couldn't figure out how to go about doing it.
Mm-hmm. Being told you can't do something, being told Blacks can't swim as a young kid, I'm sure that stuck with you for a long time. Like all of us can relate to being told we can't do something, especially when you're younger. When you were younger, did you notice that there was a difference in access to swimming between white and Black children, or was that maybe not something? When did you first start noticing that?
Yeah, I did notice right away. The neighborhood that I lived in was predominantly Black, Latinx, and Filipino. And we had one municipal pool, which was about slightly larger than my bathtub, which is not exactly the largest thing in the world. And the only time we had access was over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And, just like any other neighborhood where you have kids that want to go and cool down, everybody's going to be in that pool. So there's like 90 million of us just jumping around and horsing around. But most of us didn't know how to swim. And a large contingent of us were like either in 4 feet or less, playing, chicken fights and all the rest of the stuff and cannonballs and what have you. So we didn't think about it necessarily, but when I stopped to think about it now, I realized, number one, how small it was. Number two, how dilapidated it was.
Mm-hmm.
The lifeguard was white. The people that ran the pool were white. And the rest of us were just Black and brown. This is our only means for getting wet outside of a bathtub that we knew about. We didn't know about UCSD's, University of California, San Diego's pools. We didn't know about San Diego State's pools. We didn't know about those because those were probably off limits to us, at least through, the wink and a nod type situation, even in San Diego. So yeah, we had no knowledge, but thinking back on it now, yeah, there was definitely a separation.
Yeah. We talked about that last week. I think some people were on the call, just like our intro to swimming and where it started and, how we noticed differences as a kid. Like I grew up in Pleasanton. It's predominantly white. Like every kid did summer league, and had access to not only pools, but instruction. And, I think that's underrated, not only access, but having instruction. So you joined CIRC then in 2008. And that was when you kind of started working with Total Immersion, which we'll get into. But 2008 also was the year that Colin Jones was on the 4x100 winning relay. I don't know, I'm sure people remember that. It was Jason Lezak and Michael Phelps. Was seeing him that year, I don't know when the timeline was, but did you see him and was that pivotal to you taking the plunge into bay swimming and wanting to join CIRC? Or, had you kind of decided and then you saw him and you're like, oh, there's someone else like me, up there doing big things. Like how important was it seeing him on the TV and on that relay?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Actually, like I said, I hadn't said anything to anyone, my mother, my sister, or anyone for 30 years. Second night of the 2008 Summer Games, and Phelps is going for, gold number 2 in the men's 4x100 meter relay. And, I remember watching that, and I remember the commentators, I think it was Roddy Gaines, I forget the other guy's name, were saying that they were never going to beat the French. Everybody knew that the French were the most dominant team. There was no way that was going to happen. And of course, as you said, Jason Lezak comes from behind and beats Elaine Bernard at the wall, winning, the gold medal and keeping Phelps' hope alive. And as exciting as it was to watch Phelps jump in and then Garrett Webber-Gale jump in, what fascinated me the most was seeing the third leg when Colin Jones jumped in. I had never seen that before in the Olympics. And I just literally was glued to the TV. I couldn't believe that there was this young Black man who was just like flying through the water, one of the 32 fastest men in the world in this competition. And I just literally was just glued. And then when they won, I was so ecstatic. And I said, that's it. I have to do this. I'm going to learn how to swim if it kills me. And so I went ahead and reached out to a couple of people and, got some information from them. I went to them. And although they were very kind, I just didn't resonate with them in terms of how they were teaching me. And the second person, at least I'll give her a lot of credit, told me, you're not afraid of the water, because she mostly teaches people who have a fear of the water. So why don't you look up Total Immersion Swimming? That mainly deals with teaching adults how to swim. And I didn't know what Total Immersion was about, so I Googled it, and I got this book by this man named Terry Laughlin, and I read it, and it resonated with me so much. And fortunately, there was a workshop that was happening 5 or 6 months later, and so I signed up for it, and I went to the workshop, and that's where I learned to swim. And ironically, I learned to swim from Terry's eldest daughter, Fiona Laughlin, who's a very dear friend of mine.
No, that's perfect segue. I was actually going to ask you about Total Immersion. So you started learning with them and you still work with them. So could you tell us a little bit more about the role, and maybe Eric or Danny, you could post a link in the chat box so people could check it out. But what work do you continue to do with Total Immersion?
Well, right now I'm a Total Immersion swim coach. I was certified 3 years ago. And
Total Immersion, sorry, that's for adult learn to swim, correct? Yeah.
It's adult, yeah, but you can teach young people as well. But yeah, it was geared towards especially triathletes, where they could make the swimming portion a lot easier. A lot of them struggled through it. It's just like something to get past and then get on, the bike and then eventually run, which of course we're all land-based mammals, and we're not comfortable, or excuse me, we're not designed to swim in the water. I mean, we breathe this air, we, the water, or the air in the water is like 800 times more, more dense. And so, we can't obviously inhale, at least for us when we're underwater, we don't have gills. But essentially, it was designed for adults. And it's just a methodology used to teach swimmers how to improve their performance by learning how to move through the water more efficiently. And this is done through a variety of drills and culminating with the whole stroke. And yeah, that for me was very simple to learn. And I think it helped a lot for other people that I started coaching who were learning, because I was an adult. And I told them, I said, listen, you can learn this. I said, I do it all the time. I said, I learned as an adult, and I'm doing marathon swims. So don't tell me you can't do it. Don't give me that excuse. I waited until I was 43, and look at where I'm at now.
Yeah. You shared this story on that other podcast, teaching Black female triathletes in Kona. And something you said was people learn something when they have people like them teaching them.
Right.
And you seem, and what I've heard, that you have a very encouraging coaching style. What's a little bit like, how would you explain your coaching style and that experience teaching those female triathletes?
Well, one of the things that I told those amazing women, there were 6 of them that came from Atlanta to learn, was that, first of all, we have an incredibly rich swimming history. It dates back centuries. You'd think that, we only started learning this within the last 20 to 30 years. No, that's not true. We were the dominant swimming culture for nearly 500 years, from 1445 to 1880. No one swam but us, almost literally. That's well documented. If you get an opportunity, folks, I'm going to plug books now. Undercurrents of Power, Aquatic Culture in the African Diaspora by Dr. Kevin Dawson, who's a good friend of mine, who was also on the show, talks about that. Talks about the rich swimming history that we had on the Gulf Coast, in Senegal, in Ghana, in Liberia, in Cameroon, or what's now called all those places. And that's something that most people don't know about. And so I was encouraging them to tell these people, it says, the reason why I'm telling you, ladies, all of this is you were born to swim in open water. Your ancestors learned how to swim in open water. When they were weaned, or when they were finished weaning, they were in the water swimming. By the time they were 4 or 5, they were extremely proficient. That's impressive. And that's a history that needs to be told, that needs to be encouraged, and needs to be highlighted, for our people can understand how important swimming is to not only our culture, but also as a vital life skill that you need. There is no other, I always say the same thing, there is no sport in the world that you can show me stats that if I don't know how to play football, that if I don't know how to play basketball, that if I don't know how to play tennis, that I'm going to die. You don't know how to swim. You fall into a body of water, whether it be a pool or open water, and you don't know how to swim. That's it. You're gone in 30 seconds. That's all it takes. Right. So that's the emphasis that I try to put on this, and back that up with the history and the encouragement that people need. I often don't cite the statistics of like our drowning rates and stuff. That's a depressing thing. So I go with the positives of all the things that we've done, and that's very important. And there's a myriad of them that are out there. If anybody doesn't know, I don't know how many people on this call know about Richard Etheridge. who was a captain of an organization, the Life Saving Service, back in Pea Island, North Carolina, in the Outer Banks. It was a 7-man crew. They were the precursor to the Coast Guard. And I forget when it was. It's, gosh, let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. Sometime in October of 18, and let me see, it was, give me 2 seconds here to remember. Yeah, that's right, 1886. He and his crew saved the crew of the ES Newman during a Cat 3 hurricane. They had, large dories that they needed to get out there, and they couldn't get the dories out because the waves are too strong. So what he did, and I'm not lying, you can read this in the book Fire on the Beach, the story of the Pea Island Lifesavers by David Wright and David Zobe, is that he tied a rope around 2 of his men's waists, and they literally swam out. Repeat, swam out to the boat in a Cat 3 hurricane, by the way. We've all been at Ocean Beach and tried to get out and 3-foot waves. We know how much of a challenge that is. Can you imagine going out there in a Cat 3 and making it? I can't even fathom that. This is 1886. This isn't 2021. This is.
And we're all talking about how windy and cold it is today, so none of us swam.
Absolutely. So when people say Black people don't swim, it says, "Oh, you want to get into a debate with me about that? Okay, let me school you a little bit. Let me tell you about the history." So I used those as an impetus to say, you can do this. You can do this just as well as anybody else if you put in the effort, and it'll happen. Your body is not different than anyone else's.
Yeah. I do have notes, and I do want to bring up Kevin Dawson in that interview with him because it's so fascinating to me. I've actually listened to it twice now. But this is a harder question. Something that the clubs have been talking about since George Floyd's lynching, and definitely in the Dolphin Club People and Culture Committee, and I'm sure Cirque is talking about it in their own way, but the question of how do we make the club more welcoming and inclusive? And I think in asking that question, it's kind of been brought up, how do we do that without treating POC swimmers as commodities? Like, oh, okay, great, now we have 5 Black swimmers, our club's doing amazing. You know what I mean, though? And right. Listening to your story in Total Immersion, it's about bringing people into the water. And I think inclusion and the feeling of being welcome to a sport or community stems from feeling encouraged and having people cheer you on and having people tell you you can do this because there are facts showing that you are capable. It is in your DNA, it is in your history, it is in your ancestors that you know how to swim. So it's like maybe we're trying too hard to answer the wrong question. And the question we should be working on is how can we educate more of the Black community and Latinx community of what their history is in the water and encouraging new swimmers to try it. So I guess, I don't know if that resonates with you at all, or your goals of getting more Black and Latinx swimmers to join marathon swimming, or what do you think the answer is to get more inclusion and diversity into marathon swimming or open water swimming or at the clubs?
That's a great question, and it's a complex one, but I'll do my best to answer it from my own perspective. One of the things I wanted to do was just read something that a friend of mine's, Jen Fry, who was also a person on one of my podcasts. There was an episode called Talking About Whiteness, and it was a 2-part episode. And she says, quote, "Just because you have an open door doesn't mean you're open to receiving feedback. An open door doesn't mean you're willing to walk through it and meet people halfway." And I think that's an amazing quote. And at least from my perspective, what I can take from that is the following. I've had this discussion many times with people saying, how can we get more people here, who look like you and, who look like such and such and whatever. I says, that's not going to happen. And they said, why not? And I says, because they don't feel welcome. I said, a lot of them don't feel welcome. I says, I've had some horrible experiences at the South End over the years, some really horrible, literally racist experiences. And I remember distinctly one that happened about 12 years ago. It was during the winter. I was swimming and I come out of the water and it was pretty cold that day. It was like possibly 48, 49 degrees. And I'd been swimming for about 35, 40 minutes. And I was walking along the beach, going up our little steps, and there was another member who was with a guest who he was helping putting on his wetsuit. And the guy was worried about wearing a wetsuit and being chastised because, both clubs like to tease people who wear wetsuits. And the guy said, don't worry about it. That's all, you know, you know, fun and games and stuff like. No one's really going to do anything to you. And just as I was passing by, I says, look at Naji. He was wearing a permanent wetsuit. And I stopped and I turned around, I looked at him, and excuse my language, I said, what the fuck did you just say to me? I literally got up into his face about 2 inches. I said, say it again, say it again. For that way, when I kill you, I've got my reason for why I did it, even though I'm going to go to jail. And he's like backing up and saying, well, I didn't say anything. I said, oh my God, you don't even got the balls to say it again. And I was just so livid. And I remember a good friend of mine's kind of gently pulled me away. And I wasn't as upset with him about saying it. I was upset with the other people around me who heard it and didn't do anything. And I turned to all of them and I said, I remember every single one of your faces. Don't ever approach me. Don't talk to me. Don't say nothing, because you're people I don't want to be around. I cannot trust you. And I was so livid, I just had to walk away. And this was at a time when I was pretty much the only one at the club. And so for me, one of the big things that we need to do is have a lot of education, not from those of us who are Black and Latinx and stuff like that. It's whites who need to educate themselves, who need to read the books like Kevin Dawson's book, who need to read Jeff Wiltse's Contested Waters, who need to read about Fire on the Beach and a number of other books. My podcast, I don't care if people listen to my podcast. I got past that years ago. But what needs to happen is that education. And if you are going to have that invitation, why don't you go and talk with people from those communities and see what they would, think about doing it? Not just me and the others and stuff like that, but going to, people from these communities and finding out about the clubs that are around, that are predominantly Black and brown, that are available, and talking with them and learning from them, and then extending that invitation, like you and I and Joseph are trying to do now. Because that's the only way I think it's really going to move the needle forward, is first of all, educating yourselves, and then being humble enough to understand that, it may not work, it may take a long, long time before people start showing up. And it is going to take a long time before people start showing up in mass. It's just the way it's going to be. I'm not saying that there's not people who don't enjoy open water, but probably the first place it's going to happen is in the pool. And so you need to concentrate more on going to the pool and getting to know people and stuff, and then extending that invitation once you make a friendship and understanding where their lived experiences, and then possibly coming down and inviting them. Because I don't just see it as, like I said with that quote, just opening up the doors doesn't mean it's going to be a welcome thing and stuff. And you're always going to have people who are going to be jerks and stuff. I get that. But it's the environment. Both clubs have a lot of white faces on their walls. God knows Cirque does. Almost every single photo up there is about, white people. I'm the only one that's up there who's not, for surfing, and that's about it. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way I would approach it.
No, it does. And I think that's definitely the realizations and the feelings, that we're starting to get as we explore it more and more within ourselves. And yeah, that's a horrible story. I have nothing to say to that. I just hope that now we're moving to a point where the people around you would say something, no more bystander effect. And also I think when you bring up your podcast, you're selling yourself short a little bit. You moving on to the pod, you were honored at Pool, a social history of segregation exhibition in Philadelphia last year. And your award was in recognition for giving a voice to the Black aquatic community, and showing various ways Black swimmers have been successful in the past and present and future. And I guess, to me, what that means is what you're doing, Naji, is making a really big difference. And it's showing people that there are people that look like them out there. And so I don't know. I just, I hope you feel proud of yourself for that. But what is your professional background and how did that lead to you starting a podcast? Like starting a podcast is a really big undertaking. Where was the inspiration for wanting to start crossing the lane lines and get that up and going?
Well, the impetus for starting it happened about a week after the lynching of George Floyd. By the way, Kat, thank you for calling it a lynching because that's what it was. There's no, in my opinion, no other way to phrase it. And I was really angry after seeing that. I sadly I'd seen that so many times. Philando Castile, Laquan McDonald, Amadou Diallo. I mean, the list is endless. And I was just really devastated. And so I said, what can I do? I'm tired of protesting. I've been out in the streets for so many years since Rodney King. I can't keep going out there each time, even though I know I have to. So what else can I do? And I sat down and I started thinking about it. And I came up with the idea of addressing the issues within the swim community, the disparities that were out there. The stories that I'd heard from friends of saying, why are you on the pool deck? Where's your credentials? Are you supposed to be here? Basketball courts are over there, all that nonsense. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and reach out and try to create a podcast. I'd done it in the past and stuff, so I knew what to do. And I'm not afraid to interview people and ask more than softball questions. I don't, if you've ever listened to my podcast, I don't ask those kind of questions. And so I just started reaching out. And one of the first people I reached out to was Ebony Roseman of Black Kids Swim, which is an organization that helps elite level Black swimmers, younger swimmers, to find clubs and safe spaces for them to train, to get resources and all the rest of this. And she was my first interview. And then just through chance, I started meeting other people. For some reason, or another, they were reaching out to me, and some women have reached out to me about being interviewed for a book that she's compiling about Blacks in aquatics. It's supposed to come out sometime this year, I believe. And she had mentioned Dr. Jeff Wiltsey, who is the author of Contested Waters. And I said, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to talk with Jeff. And she says, oh, I'll put you in touch with him. And like 2 days later, he wrote back to me and he says, yeah, I'll come on the show. And Jeff came on the show, which led to me to Kevin Dawson, which just started snowballing. Just out of the blue, I decided to write Maritza Correa, who's now Maritza McClendon, who was the first African-American woman to make a U.S. Olympic team and also to win a medal, and ask her to come on the show. I didn't hear from her for about 2 weeks, and all of a sudden she wrote me back frantically saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I've just been really busy. Of course, I'd love to come on your show. And I was just stunned, that someone of that caliber would do it. And it just kept going. And I found out that there were a lot of people who were more than happy to come on and talk about this because no one was approaching this at all. At all. Swim Sam on occasions puts up podcasts about these issues and stuff like that. And I commend them for doing that. And there's a couple of others that'll do it during this time, of the year in February. But I said, I want to do this, every single month and highlight people, whether it be in swimming or in rowing or in diving or in or artistic swimming or what have you and stuff like that. I want to highlight all of these because people need to know that we do all of this and we do it very well. Mm-hmm. And, talking about legendary coaches, besides Jim Ellis, there's Malachi Cunningham, who no one knows about, who was around 4 years before Jim was ever around. Talking about some of the great, Black clubs in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, in Detroit, in Philadelphia that were just dominant through the 30s and 40s. No one knew about that. I didn't know about it until I found out about it. So hearing all of this was not only informative for me, but it was informative, obviously, for the guests. And so that was, the impetus. And, it's been a struggle sometimes. I'm scrambling some days to hope that someone's going to get back to me. And if they're not, then I got to scramble to try to get someone else on. But every single guest has been so gracious with their time. I keep up with a lot of them. I call them on occasions and we'll talk, or they'll call me, or they'll say, hey, listen, I've got someone out here who wants to learn to swim. Can you teach them? I said, yeah, sure. And he says, they don't have much money. I said, I didn't talk about money. I just said I'd teach them. I don't care. I said, they can pay me or not, but they can do that. And so it's really nice because it's a two-way street. Everyone's very generous. I'm supposed to have a Zoom call with Jeff Wiltsey sometime this week to catch up. So it's really nice. And so for me, it's just getting it out there and making sure that people have that access where they can find out that information, because I think it's really important for the general community and also for the Black community, and it's in particular the Black swim community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've had some really big names on there and some pretty incredible guests, actually. Have you had one episode maybe that surprised you more than the others, or one that is a favorite of yours, or maybe you learned the most from?
Yeah, my all-time favorite one, and it's close with all of them because they're all my favorites when they come up, but it had to have been my interview with Malachi Cunningham, who was a coach of and the founder of the Tiger Sharks swim club back in Philadelphia, who I got the chance to hang out with the entire time I was in Philadelphia with him and his lovely wife, Olivia. And I know his son, Damon, and his daughter as well. And that was just so great, because the first time that he and I spoke, we just connected right away. We're both Philly boys. I was born in Philadelphia, even though I grew up out here in North Philadelphia. And, it was just really nice, him just teasing me and whatnot. But one of the things that happened in that interview was him telling me just about forming the Tiger Sharks. And I thought at the time that the Tiger Sharks was an all-Black club. And it turned out that was absolutely not the case. There was a number of white swimmers that swam with him, and he purposefully did that because he didn't want to have a separation. He wanted to make sure that everybody understood that they were just as good as everybody else. And 2 years ago, he celebrated his 75th birthday. And on that birthday celebration, which is a YouTube video, he had a lot of his former swimmers on there. And some of them date back to like 1969. And I remember seeing this one white guy who was on there, and he just says, God, he says, I don't know how many times you kicked me off this team for me and my crappy attitude, but you'll always welcome me back. You never kicked me out permanently. And he says, I would never do that because, you're one of my kids. I take care of my own. I make sure that they're inclusive, and I make sure that they understand that this is a place where, you can learn to swim and swim well, but also you're going to learn community. You're going to learn responsibility. You're going to learn compassion for others. And presumably, ironically, this guy, he openly said, hey, I voted for Trump the first time, and he said that, but he says, I realized the second time around what you told me about didn't jive to what I thought I bought into. And I came back, and it really made a difference for me. And hearing those stories was just fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I was just really, really just impressed with him because he was more than just a coach. He was a counselor. He was a father figure. He was a best friend. Ironically, and he was the first, man of African descent to coach at the NC2A in Division I. He coached at Temple for 4 years and then at LaSalle for like 15. And one of his swimmers is Lori King, who's a noted marathon swimmer herself. And she said, those were the greatest 4 years of my life swimming. She said, that man made me feel like a scorer every single time. She said, I might have given him maybe 3 points in all 4 years that I swam, but you'd never know it from his attitude. He always made you feel like you were a scorer. And she said, that resonated with me for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And that really meant a lot for me to hear from such an accomplished marathon swimmer. And especially a young white woman who was, learned from him back in the early 90s and late 80s. And that was just great for me to hear that. Probably the most controversial podcast was the one where I took USA Swimming to task after Cleet Keller was, spotted being in the Capitol trying mm-hmm. to overturn the election.
Right.
And I had Dr. Johanna Mellis on. And, I just told her, says, let loose. I said, say what you need to say, and I'll bring up the questions. And she did. And I got a ton of, pretty intense emails and some other stuff. Some of them were threats, saying, we're going to track you down. We're going to beat the crap out of you and all the rest of the stuff. I'm like, all right, whatever, man. I don't have time for this stuff. But, I was happy that was out there, because it's all right. Now I'm making them think. Now I'm forcing them to think, this is what it is. So yeah, those were the two that I think stand out the most, but all of them I love.
It is interesting hearing you talk about coaching. Like my experience with Terry, the coach at Cal, it's she pushed us first and foremost to be strong women and to be leaders and to have fun. And if we were doing those things right, then we would swim well. And I think those are the coaches that stand out as being role models for your life, and the people that shape who you are. And so it's awesome, that he was there to shape those kids' lives well into adulthood. And, I think that's important to have strong coaches out there. So one of the most interesting and informative podcasts I listened to was your interview with anthropologist Dr. Kevin Dawson.
Historian. He's a historian.
Historian, sorry.
That's okay.
Historian. And it's where he spoke about the rich aquatic history of Black people stemming from African ancestors and how they were expert swimmers and canoe builders. Could you just tell us a kind of summary of that for people that haven't listened to that episode? I think
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and that was one of my favorites as well. Like you just reminded me, I got to give Kevin a call and something. He'd be actually a good person to bring up for that swim, him and his daughter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that show centered around his book, Undercurrents of Power, aquatic history in the African diaspora. And what Kevin talked about was that, like I said earlier, from 1445 to 1880, Blacks were considered the best swimmers, the best canoe builders, the best canoeists, the best free divers in the world. And this was obviously long after they had been imported over here in the slave trade. They still had their rich swimming history. I think a lot of people forget that. I'm sure all of you have seen images at some point when you were in high school or in college of those drawings of slaves crammed into the slave boats, just really, head to foot, just, packed in like sardines. And there were three main reasons for that. Number one, maximum profit, because you knew about a third of your, cargo, there's no other way to define them as, was going to die along the way. And the other part, of course, was being chained down to make sure that they weren't mutinying and rising up. But one of the key things was to prevent them from jumping overboard and swimming away. And one of the things that he used to say was, if they were on deck at any time and they could see shore, they'd jump over and swim away. And we all know on a clear day, you can see shore from at least 20 miles away. We all know that. Can you imagine swimming 20 miles in chains and making it? I get worn out, just doing training swims and stuff like just in my bathing suit, with nothing other than my goggles and me and my body weight. I can't imagine lugging 20 more pounds with me. That's insane. But yet these people did it. Or they would drown themselves, not because they didn't know how to swim, just because it says, I'm not afraid. This is going to release me into an earthly realm. I mean, they considered the sea a sacred place. So it wasn't that kind of like terror. They knew how to swim. The majority of them knew how to swim, but they said, okay, this is just better for me. And also with the fact that, they were free divers and that they used this to commodify themselves. They would charge people who used them as, salvagers of shipwrecks. And they said, okay, I'll do this, but you're going to pay me for it. Mm-hmm. And the salvagers knew that they had to, because no one else in the world could do it. You can't whip the person into doing it. They're like saying, listen, if you keep doing that, I'll just drown myself. That's fine with me. I can go. But if you want this, if you want me to bring your cargo back for you, it's going to cost you. And so they were able to use that as a chip in order to go ahead and get themselves a monetary cost for doing this. And I knew nothing about this. I knew absolutely nothing about that. I always assumed that surfing was founded in Hawaii. That's not true. Surfing was founded in Ghana, and Cameroon, and Liberia, 150 years before it was seen in Hawaii, which is well documented. So all these things I found so fascinating when he brought them up, not only in his book, but also in the interview. And, they had a number of marathon swimmers at the time who would swim from, various Caribbean islands, which were like sometimes, as close as 25 miles away, but sometimes 50 to 60 to 80 to 100 miles away. And they would swim either almost there or a good portion away or swim back, and that's extraordinary, considering that you had no support craft. You didn't know the currents. It was a much bigger predatory environment at the time. And here they are just freely doing it all the time. And by the way, they used to kill sharks and manta rays and all the rest of that for sport, just for fun.
And crocodiles, right?
And crocodiles, yeah. That was a blood sport. They got off on that. So it's just crazy.
Yeah, I grew up, I've been swimming since I was 4. I'm going on 27 whatever years of swimming, and first time I've heard about this history, and I'm a surfer, is listening to your podcast. And why do you think so few people, I mean, maybe more people know the story than I do, but why do you think people aren't learning this?
I think our society regulates what we can and what we can't learn in general, unless you really do independent study on it. I mean, Kevin and Jeff and the others who I've had on the show had to do a ton of research. I mean, a ton of research to track this stuff down, and I commend them for their stewardship of doing that. But yeah, in general, it's not just, the community as a whole. Black people don't know about this. Most of them don't. Even Black people who are swimmers and who are canoeists or who are, artistic swimmers or what have you, or even marathon swimmers, they don't know about all the stuff. When I get into something, I will research the heck out of it. I'll find every single thing I can about it because I'll really invest, because I want to be able to find what's motivating me to do this. And that was what was for me. I think a lot of people just assume that, oh, well, Charles Chapman was the first person, African descent to swim the English Channel. I said, yes, he was. I said, however, that same year, there was a man who was on a relay, Mike Johnson, who swam, in a relay across the channel. But Charles wasn't the first to attempt it. Willis Hanks was one of the first ones back in the 50s. He tried 5 different times, almost making it, when he got to the 2-mile buoy and he couldn't get past on his 5th try. Walter Johnson, back in the 20s, was a noted marathon swimmer. Pauline Jackson, also in the 20s, was one of the first people 2 or 3 different times who attempted Catalina, which I believe that you've done, Kat. And it's just, it's tough now. I don't even want to think about how tough it was back then, back in the 20s, especially with the resources that you had versus what she had. No GPS, no whatever and stuff. You had a fisherman just taking you out there. A lot less lights to deal with and stuff. So, you've got all these different challenges, but all this is to say that I had to do the research to try to find out this stuff. It was I who tracked down Charles Chapman, got to have a relationship with him, got to know him. It was myself who tried to reach out to find some of the survivors of the people from the Outer Banks, that I talked about in that hurricane. There's a man who is, I think, the great grandson of the captain of that boat. I'm trying to track him down now. I wanted to have him on the show to talk about what the lifesavers did to save his great grandfather. He says, if it wasn't for Richard Etheridge and his men, I would not be here standing here talking to you right now. I wouldn't have existed because my grandfather, my great grandfather would have been dead. So, it's a matter of tracking it down, but it's not readily available like it is within the broader white society. This is getting to be a larger, more ethnically diverse community, to be sure, within this country. But in terms of the educational aspect, it's still predominantly white. I mean, that's just the bottom line. That's what it is. And that's what we know. That's one of the reasons why we're having this big issue on critical race theory. No one wants to talk about, the past. No one wants to look at that history, but you have to look at that history to understand where you're going.
Right.
And possibly where you are right now.
Yeah. In talking about, we obviously are focusing on swimming, open water swimming, but I think it's very noticeable that Blacks are underrepresented in all things aquatic. Everything from being marine biologists to rowing to surfing, and I've been on some different talks listening about changing the lineup in surfing. You had an interview with Rhonda Harper, who's an elite surfer, veteran Coast Guard, founder of Black Girl Surf. Is that one of your goals in your podcast, to bring light to all aspects of aquatics, or are you right now focusing mainly on open water swimming?
No, actually, I could talk about open water swimming all day, of course, but Yeah, it's highlighting all aquatic sports, and you bring it up in a brilliant way, Kat. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I brought Ashley Johnson, who's an elite level artistic swim coach. I mean, she's placed 10 people on the national team. There is no way you'll make the national team back east if you're going for artistic swimming unless you go to her. That's your only shot. Everybody, from what I've heard in the community, and I've spoken to many people, says it's just common sense. She's that good, you know. And there is what the Black Coaches and Rowers Association that just popped up after George Floyd's lynching, that's come around, that has recently started to gain ground. There is Minorities in Shark Sciences, which I'm trying to get an interview with. There's these young women who bring other young women and men of various ethnic backgrounds to understand about sharks and their habits and their migration periods and all the rest of this, and the ecological dangers that they are facing as a result of overfishing and all the rest of this. Yeah, it's very important that we cover all of those, because people, like I said, or like you said earlier, they're not going to do something unless they see someone that looks like them. It's not going to happen. Women's soccer has exploded because the amazing ability of these phenomenal women that are on the U.S. national team, which really, obviously back in the 80s really took off and showed young girls that, yeah, I can be an elite level soccer player. I can do this and I can make this happen. Same with the WNBA, when I finally started taking off and getting these incredible athletes out there, girls started thinking that. And the same will be for Black people, I mean, there's a reason why they gravitate towards football. There's a reason why they gravitate towards basketball. They see people that look like them all the time. Yeah. Swimming, of course not. It's freaking expensive. The access is tough to get. The reception isn't that great. Yeah. So they're like,
as we're kind of talking about that representation and seeing people that look like you, Joseph, Miriam Lynch with Diversity Aquatics, and myself, we're organizing a swim for August this year. Could you share a little bit more about that swim with everyone and why it's so important?
You're going to put the pressure on me. You've been on these talks. You better cover my butt on this one. Like Kat said, herself, myself, and a man named Joseph Hancock, who is born and bred here in San Francisco, but is actually living in Vermont temporarily, finishing up, I believe, an internship with his master's in social work, as well as Dr. Miriam Lynch from Diversity in Aquatics, are coordinating a swim, possibly 1 or 2 mile swim. I think we're probably going to just keep it to being just an Alcatraz swim, where we're going to have, Black and brown people having the opportunity to do an open water swim, to understand and make sure that they understand their rich aquatic history. And I think that is something that hasn't happened. I mean, obviously we all know there's been like 2 million Alcatraz organizations out there doing it all the time, but no one focusing on that. And I think that's very important. There's not that many open water swims that have that focus. There's the Gorée Island swim in Senegal, which I love. But that's a little bit out of people's price range, of course. You'd have to travel all the way to Africa. But it's pretty cool when you see the videos of the Gorée swim. I mean, we're talking 5,000 people out there. They all look like me. All of them look like me. I'm not sticking out like I would at a club swim. Whether I be in a kayak or whether I be in the water. There, I'm just another person. They're like, hey, how you doing? Here I get all the focus on me. And I don't want all the focus on me. Yeah. I want the focus on everybody and stuff like that, because we all just look at we all look like each other. And I'm not trying to do it as a separation thing and stuff like that. Please don't misunderstand me. But I think it's important for everybody, at least once in your life, that you're in the dominant culture. That's why I'm such a big proponent of HBCUs. That's why I'm such a big proponent of, making sure that, when a child is in the pool, on the deck, there's a person who looks like them, whether they be Black or brown, or from the LGBT community, or who has physical disabilities that, they can resonate and says, hey, listen, he did it, I can do it, or she did it, I can do it.
Yeah. And so you've done swims, you know, we've talked a lot about your podcast and stuff, but you are an accomplished marathon swimmer yourself. And you are the first Black swimmer, I believe, Point Bonita to Bay Bridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that your proudest swim, or are there some other ones in there that really stand out to you?
You know, actually, that probably is, simply because it was the first time that I really decided to push myself. And I spoke with the legendary Bob Roper about it, and his eyes lit up. Yeah, let's do it, you know. And any of you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call who remember Bob. You know, Bob's up for anything and stuff like that. You know, of course, you may not come back alive when you do a Bob Roper swim, but at least you can try it. We all know that about Bob. And I went out there and I did it, and it was himself and Patty Payton who went out there in a paddy wagon. And sadly to say that both Patty as well as Bob are no longer with us. And also a good friend of mine's, Cat Brown, who swam with me. And we started from Point Bonita, and it was actually a really nice day. It wasn't that crazy west of the Golden Gate. And I can't describe the feeling I felt at the end of that swim. I was just so amped up, as we all know, once you complete one, whether it's like a 2 mile or 50 mile, it's just, the feeling's incredible. And you look back and says, I did that. You know, you look all the way back, holy cow, I did all of that. And it's so exciting. This is so great. Now I'm on cloud 9. And yeah, it was a wonderful feeling, because for me, it was just like, wow, yeah, more is possible.
Mm-hmm.
More is possible if you can do this. And you can tell people, yeah, I did this. Yeah, I have proof that I did it. Yeah, it was it was verified. It was great. So yeah, that one was probably the big one for me in a lot of ways. And yeah, sometimes I still think about that and I just laugh, you know, just all the times when we were stopping and Bob's yelling and says, no, you're going the wrong way. I said, shut up, Bobby, I know what I'm doing, you know. And or just hearing him and Patty argue in the boat and stuff like that. And it just gave me a chuckle, because that's always the way those two were. No, we should have him go deeper inside. You're going to get him run over by this boat, you know. But it was a lot of fun. Now I will always remember that, though, the three of them supporting me and just making me feel like I was just on top of the world, because I was that day.
That's awesome. You know, sometimes every time I have a marathon swim, there's dark moments, you know, when I'm swimming through the night and it's 10, you know, going on 12 hours, whatever. And usually my mind's blank, but I do get to the moments of thinking, why am I doing this? And for me, it's a lot of women and young girls in swimming reach out on my Instagram and they're like, because of you, I got in the water today. Or because of you, I signed up for a swim. Do you have a why that's similar to that? When you're doing those swims, are you thinking, I'm doing this because a young Black child is going to see me doing this and want to set these goals or think they're capable of? Does that thought go through your mind, or what's your inspiration?
Sure, but not because of that reason, although I appreciate that reason. The main reason, and I say this for everybody, is first of all, you should learn to swim, obviously. And nowadays, you'd be wise to learn to swim in a pool, unless you are near a really warm lake or something like that. But my second emphasis is that once they are somewhat proficient in the pool, I said, now you need to learn how to swim in open water. And I said, oh, I don't want to swim in open water. I says, I don't care if you ever swim in open water. The reason why I'm saying it is because I've seen experienced swimmers drown in open water because they don't understand the currents. They don't understand the tides. They can't handle themselves around wildlife. You know, I said, it's important to know what you're doing out there, because eventually you're probably going to go to a lake and horse around with your friends. Eventually, you're going to probably want to go out to the beach. Eventually, you're going to want to just like think, oh, I'll just go to my way, up to my waist. And all of a sudden there's a drop off and you plunge and now you're in 20 feet of water. And you might panic. Like I said, you might be a very experienced swimmer. But do you know what to do in fresh water, like at Tahoe, when there is a drop off, and keep yourself calm? Do you know what to do when you're into a riptide and you get pulled out? Do you know how to get back? Do you freak out when suddenly you see this fin come up and down and think, oh my gosh, it's a shark, and actually it ends up being a dolphin or a seal? You know, all these things are very important to understand. And, you know, although I love it, I always tell people, says, you need to get used to that. Because eventually you're going to be around there. 70% of, you know, this planet is water.
Right.
You're going to be around it at some point,
Yeah.
you know, and that's really important. For me, I wish we just go the way of Australia, that the minute that you start going to school, you learn how to swim. And every single year until you matriculate out of high school, you have to pass their swim courses, not just one. You just have to keep going. And I think that that's so important. I think it should be mandated. I don't think it should be open for discussion. I don't care if it's a private school or a public school. You have to learn.
Yeah, I remember in college, I did a lot of work with the Boys and Girls Club of West Oakland, and we wanted so badly to get a swim clinic going, and literally couldn't get access to a pool, like insurance, or couldn't, like, everything was a roadblock. And I was like, we're not trying to go have playtime over here in the water. We're trying to teach a life skill. Like, you've got the Cal women's swim team volunteering their time, and the city, you can't find a pool. You know, God, it was like, that's a regret I have. I look back on not trying harder with that. And yeah, that does stand out to me, you know, that it should be a life skill. And I even just like being comfortable in the ocean, you know, Me Water. I don't know if you're familiar with Me Water, but they teach inner city kids how to surf. And I volunteered with them a bunch. And Eddie is the founder of that. And some of those kids have never seen the ocean. And what stands out to me is when they experience the ocean, or they get on a surfboard and I'm behind them guiding it, and they stand up for the first time, the smiles on their faces. Like, the ocean and the water for me has always been my safe place, my second home. I mean, we're made of water. It's ingrained in our souls to be comfortable in the water. And just, you know, going to the beach and being afraid of it it's sad. It's heartbreaking, you know, and I don't know, it stands out to me. So, yeah, thank you for everything you're doing. I understand what you're saying. I guess, let's see. We've got a couple more minutes. We're going to open it up to other people's questions. But just curious, in 5, 10, 15 years, you know, what do you want open water swimming to look like? Or, you know, or what do you want CERC in DC to look like? You know, if you could have an image of, you know, all your goals coming to fruition, what would it look like? That's a big question.
That's a big question. Yeah, it is a big question. Oh, that's a good question too. I'd like anybody who came through that door, whether it be from, you know, the red and white building or the blue and white building, feel safe and welcome. And they can feel it. They can literally feel it. I remember the first time I ever walked on to Howard University's campus and just looked around and I said, oh man, I'm home. I'm home. This is great. I'm home. And the funny thing is, a lot of people assume, oh, you know, Howard University is all Black. No, it is not. Not when HBCU was designed to be solely for Black people. I mean, they were originally and stuff like that, but over time, and still to this day, anybody can go in there. You know, if we want to get an education, they've never said that, no, you can't do that. They've never, ever once done that. Howard University's had a number of notable white swimmers that have swam under either Nick Askew or Clarence Penny Pendleton and the like. You know, they've always been welcoming. And that's the thing, you know, can you get to that point where you feel comfortable or you feel safe? But if you want to take this on, you're not the oddball. You know, you don't have to be the main focus, but everything that you do needs to feel like you're in a safe space. That if something happens, people call them out and says, hey, listen, that's bullshit. Do not ever say that to him or her again. Right. You know, don't cross that line. Don't have to go. I mean, I'm fine with going through what I have to go through if that's the result. I love that. But the reality is, and I love both clubs with all my heart. I have great friends on both sides, you know, who are wonderful people. But I think both cultures right now, it's going to take a good, honestly, Kat, you're going to be my age before I see some significant change from both clubs. That's just my opinion. It's not to try to be negative. You know, it's just a reality that I think that we're going to have. I do believe that by 2045, both clubs better get their act together, because people who look like me are going to be the majority in this country. And a friend of mine who's an amazing aquatics director in Buffalo, New York, Mike Switowski, said to Tim Hinchy, the head of USA Swimming, he said, if we don't get this sorted out now, if you think swimming is irrelevant and only gets noticed every 4 years, you know, in the Olympics, by 2045, it won't even be an Olympic sport. Watch.
Yeah.
And he's right. You know, it'll become just more and more irrelevant. And that is one sport we cannot, under any circumstances, make irrelevant. You cannot do that. Like I said before, it's the only one that if you don't learn it, you are putting your life at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, you know, we'll open it up to other questions, but just leaving with something you said with the interview with Shannon was you were saying about the English Channel and how you wanted it to get to the point where when a Black swimmer says, oh, I did the English Channel, and you're like, oh, that's great. What number were you? Oh, I was number 1200. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that image is really beautiful, you know. Yeah. So I don't know. I thought about that, and then I thought that was really lovely.
Thank you. I forgot I had said that. So
yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm getting old. I can't remember anything I say half the time.
Well, I guess if anyone else has questions, you guys can raise your hand and chime in, or however, Danny, Eric, you guys want to do that?
Yeah, if anyone has a question, just feel free to unmute yourself, maybe turn your video off, and ask away. You can also type them into the chat, and we'll ask them for you. So yeah, mics are open. Mics open. Start off, maybe just to get everyone warmed up. Thank you so much. That was an incredible conversation. That was really great. We actually did a little podcast discussion session over here on our side, and we listened to the episode where you interviewed Jen Fry. Yeah, that was a great episode. One thing that really struck me is that she said, you know, we do a lot to help children learn how to swim. Like, we go into Black communities and we try to teach them this life skill. But she pointed out, you know, there's this, there's living memory of, you know, in older generations of Black folks, Black and brown folks, of being denied entry into public swimming pools. You know, their kids are being taught to swim, and then they go home and their parents or their grandparents, you know, are afraid of this activity. And I thought it was really interesting, you know, in your case, you came to swimming as an adult. You know, what was that experience like, and what kind of support did you receive through the Total Immersion kind of swim program? And were you the only, you know, Black person in I don't know if it's like a cohort or if it's sort of a one-on-one kind of?
Yeah, at the workshop, I was the only person. But you know what was interesting when I was going through that program? I, like I said, was taught by Terry's eldest daughter, Fiona. And I had the honor of meeting Terry when he came out to San Francisco to do a master's clinic. And he invited me along. No, I wasn't a master at that point. I'm still not a master now. I never consider myself that in swimming. But he allowed me to come on. And so he and I swam out in the bay together, which was the highlight of my swim career. And later on, after we got done, I said, hey, listen, I'm going to take us out to lunch. And he said, sure. So we went out. And as Kat mentioned, you know, this was 2009. And I had mentioned like 6 months after or 6 to 8 months after the Olympics. And I started talking about what Phelps had done and how incredible it was for him to get 8 gold medals. I thought this was phenomenal. And Terry's just quietly eating, and he's just listening to me. And he says, and I'm just going on and on and on. And I've caught myself and said, I'm sorry, Terry, I'm rambling. And so, did you want to comment on anything? And he just eats for a moment, and then he stops and he looks up to me and he says, Michael Phelps is a great swimmer. There's no question about that. You know, he had all the tools. He was just a great athlete. He said, but you want to know something? Michael Phelps was a great athlete and he had all the tools because he had access. If I had had an opportunity with some black or brown girl or boy for as long as Bob Bowman did, and if I had the opportunity to have trained him with all those resources and access, I can promise you, I swear to God, that he wouldn't be on that podium as often as he was. He said, if I had the right swimmer, he said, I can promise you, he did it because he had the access. And it hit me like a ton of bricks when I heard this Irish American man talking like this. You know, it just like really resonated with me. And over the years, I got to know him and his daughters and his wife very, very well. And I work with all of them. And all the resources that they gave me to be able to move forward in my coaching, in my swimming career, and also in my coaching career were phenomenal. I mean, they would say, don't worry about it. You don't have to pay for this. And I'd always argue and I'd say, oh, I need to pay for it. He says, no, because you're trying to make it more accessible for people of color to come in and do this. He always used to say, I hate how much we charge for total immersion workshops because I want more people to have access. So since I can't do that right now, I'm going to do that for you. And all I'm asking you is always teach someone irrespective of how much they can pay. So when I coach people now, I have a very strict rule. I do charge you money for it. Some I'll ask if you have means, it's okay, well, it's X amount for these many lessons. And if we have to go further, I won't charge you any more than that. If I bring it up to a person of color or someone else who is from a marginalized or underserved community, they say, I can't afford that. And I says, how much can you afford? And they say, I can afford maybe $5. I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, really? I said, yeah. I says, but that has to be up front. I need a payment up front. He said, what about getting into, the pool and stuff like that? I said, oh no, that's included. I lied to them about that and stuff like that, but I pay for it. But my point is that I want people to have access. I want people to be able to get out there and do this. Not because it's some altruistic thing I'm trying to do. It's because someone did it for me. And it's important that people understand that this is important, that you are supported, and that you will have the resources that you need. I bought people goggles, swim caps, swimsuits when I've had the money. I work at a soup kitchen. I've been working there for nearly 20 years. I don't have cash, but I'll find it if I need to and get it to you and stuff. And I always say the same thing. So it's included in the price. Don't worry about it. We're good. I would have paid, I would have done that for you even if you had paid me the regular rate. All this is to say is that I am not going to allow anything to stop them from having an access, and that's very important. And Terry taught me that. And that for me is a huge key. And I look at him as basically, I always say it the same thing to his daughter, Fiona. I said, you saved my life, Fiona. You saved my life. And I'll never forget that.
I have a friend who, it was like 2 years of being around the water before I realized she didn't know how to swim, because she'd go to the beach, she'd get in the water, but, and I just wonder about people my age who don't know how to swim, and they're not going to be marathon swimmers, but they still have an interest. Do you think total immersion is something that would work for them, or she's expressed an interest in learning, and she lives here in San Francisco. I never kind of know where, those of us who already know don't always know the resources that would feel most comfortable as someone who is both doesn't know how to swim and is sort of embarrassed about that, but needs instruction.
Yeah, I get that. Well, first of all, I'm the only total immersion coach here in San Francisco. There's one other one in the Bay Area. He's down near Palo Alto. But, it will be beneficial for her. I mean, I'm recently started working with this 70-year-old Latinx gentleman just last Friday. And he told me the same thing. He says, do you think I can get this? I said, heck yeah, you can learn how to swim. I says, why not? I said, this is the only sport that you can be able to start in, your senior year. So I'm going to be honest with you. It says, you're not going to make the NBA. You know, let's just put it out there. NFL is not going to have you at the combine other than to watch the other athletes running around. No chance. This, yeah, you can go ahead and swim, you know. And so, yeah, there is those options. And, you know, total immersion is not the only game in town. You know, I mean, I love it, but I don't think that it's a saving grace for every single person. As long as you're knowing how to swim and swimming efficiently and you're enjoying it, I don't care who you learn from. You know, that's where I'm on board. So yeah, just encourage them, you know, to find that instruction and make it happen. And you know, there will be people out there that will help them.
Okay, thanks.
I think something else to point out is like the Dolphin Club in South End. I mean, there's probably something like 3,000 members between both clubs. Like, we're all capable of swimming and teaching someone some basics of breathing and floating in a pool. So I would say, you know, don't ever shy away from taking a friend to Sava and, you know, for the day and teaching them how to blow bubbles and float. Some of my most rewarding lessons that I've done have been adult learn to swims. So yeah, I mean, Holly, you can take ownership and take someone swimming too. You know, it's a really good way to get people in the water.
I had a question, Naji. I just wanted to commend you and celebrate you for the podcast that you've really created a community with all of your different episodes. And I'll just say as an aside that the artistic swimming one was one of my favorites, just because that was my sport, was synchronized swimming. So when that one appeared, I was like, oh my God, nobody talks about this crazy sport. And I just loved her episode and how her passion and her expertise were just wonderful. But I just wanted to, with your humility around your impact with your podcast, I just wanted to kind of ask you, what are you most proud of with your podcast? Is it the network that you've brought together, that, or just what would you say to that? It's the community that you brought together, the history that you've taught. What do you and also what do you want your listening audience to really kind of take away in general, the biggest thing or biggest things?
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that question. And I'll have to hook you up with Ashley and stuff. You guys will get along really well. Yeah, I think the biggest thing was, ironically, speaking about Ashley Johnson, she and I just talked for like an hour a few days ago, and she had just gotten back from the Diversity in Aquatics annual conference that was held down in Florida. They wanted me to come and speak there, but I couldn't make it because I'd been in New York recently and I just couldn't afford to do another trip. And one of the things that she said was, she was on this panel and she was talking, I think, with Cullen Jones and some other people who were on the panel. And afterwards they got together and they were just, you know, none of them had ever met each other and they were networking. And what was nice, with the exception of Cullen, who I've never met, all of them had been on the podcast. And they said, oh, you're such and such. I'd heard so much about this. Is great. Yeah, so excited. And she was telling me, and everyone was like, you know, saying all this stuff. She says, you know, you're responsible for that. And that made me feel good, because people who were within the diving community didn't know Ashley, and Ashley, you know, didn't know them. You know, Janai Kerr, who's from the water polo community, didn't know this person or that person. And it really makes me happy. And for years, I've been floating the idea of a Black Swim Coach Association, you know, kind of like the counterbalance ASCA, who I refuse to join. But that's my own personal reasons. And, you know, just having those resources, you know, where we could sit down and just say, hey, listen, I got this kid doing this, that, and the other thing. And something that, can you be able to help them out? Black Kids Swim does that a lot. You know, I'm kind of like one of their point people, like when they're talking about swimming and definitely open water swimming, Ebony Roseman immediately contacts us, Naji, can you take this person? I'll say, yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and do it. No problem. You know, I'll bring them out here and do whatever. Or if someone else has someone who's interested in artistic swimming, then I'll reach out to Ashley and say, who in California can I send them to? And she'll know. And so it's just building up that network more and more and more of various people. And anytime that I read an article about oh, well, we have these, African Americans doing rowing. He said, okay, let me track them down. Let me talk to these people immediately. Oh, there's people who do shark science. Let me track them down. Black girls dive. Let me talk with Nevada Windrow. And I just emailed these people and says, hey, listen, this is me. Here's my podcast. This is what I do. I'd like you to come on the show and promote your organization. And we just keep those relationships going. I never just like interview them and blow them off. I've talked to everybody at least 3 or 4 times over the last 3 years since I've interviewed them, all of them. And they know that I'm right there. And they know I'm not going anywhere. And they all say the same thing. It says, thank you for just toiling away. Because they all know it's just me. I make it sound like, oh, well, we got this big studio and whatever. You're looking at the studio. It's like my little office that my wife has graciously allowed me to have as long as it stays clean, to do what I need to do. And of course, I have my cat walking over the keyboard when I'm trying to do an interview, but that's a whole nother matter that I will never be able to win. So yeah, it's just that networking, and I really appreciate that. And I thank you for that question because it really means a lot.
I just wanted to emphasize, as others have said, how much I appreciate what Naji has been doing with his podcast. But I also wanted to ask Naji if there are any things that we can do to help, because it is just you in your home studio. One of the things I know we've talked or we've communicated about the high cost of audio equipment for something like a podcast. And, I think it's something that would be really gratifying for a lot of people to, like other podcasts have Patreon pages, but maybe there's something like that we could do to, support the effort in a more material way. Please let us know.
Well, first of all, Joanne is also one of the people who's involved in this swim, so she's being modest. But anyway, yeah, I'm okay for right now. I'm trying to figure out some things. One thing I refuse to do from the beginning, and even though I can do it through the podcast portal that I'm using, is charge people money or profit off of it. I don't personally, for me, I don't want to do that. For that way I can keep it low cost, but also at the same time trying to reach out to help other people financially, because there's a lot that are out there that charge, and that's fine. If they want to charge, let them go ahead and do that. And some of them have all the fancy bells and whistles and stuff. There's a couple of things I might do over time, but I'll take care of that money. I appreciate the offer. That's very kind of you and stuff like that. But I'm going to figure that out over the next several months and stuff. I want to go to one of these places like Best Buy or whatever and just talk with them about maybe a decent podcast mic or what have you. I know that would be one good thing to bring up. But in terms of the Patreon thing, I just decided, I'm never going to charge anybody for this. I wanted to initially, if I'll make a couple bucks. It says, no, you don't need to do that.
Well, I've got a question. Do you have any swims yourself coming up?
Well, about the one.
Yeah.
There was one I was going to do this year, but I'm going to have to put it off until next year, which is fine. I don't care. What we're doing right now is far more important. So I'll concentrate on that. But there's something that I want to do next year. And I've researched it. No one in the world's ever tried it. And I'd really, really, really love to do it. If I could pull this off, I'll retire from marathon swimming with a happy smile on my face and stuff. It'll be something that I have cherished to do for a long time. It'll have huge historical significance for the Black diaspora if I pulled it off. Really huge historical significance. I won't say what it is because there's only like 3 or 4 people that know.
You gotta wait and see.
Exactly. It'll literally be like 2 hours or 3 hours into the swim. Then I'll throw up the tracker.
The link.
Are there any other questions? We've got maybe less than a minute here. Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
I'd just like to add that Naji doesn't want to come see the work in progress, but I'm having a work in progress screening which stars Naji Ali and other South Enders at the Roxy Theater on the 27th, Sunday the 27th at 11 a.m. And I'm going to get, it's called Cold Refuge, and it features South End Rowing Club swimmers who have had real adversity in their lives. So I invite you all to come. I'm going to hand out you're going to fill out written questionnaires and give me critique on the movie because it's not done yet. I need to find out what my blind spots are because I was the shooter and the editor of this movie. So I hope that you can come. It's you can check it out at the Roxy. They're going to be sending out an email tomorrow to their list, and it'll also probably be on the website. There's an RSVP form that you need to fill out, and you have to agree to fill out this questionnaire where you can critique the movie and be part of the creative process. And you can see Naji on screen.
That's such a horrible thing to see.
Thanks, Judy. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank both Catherine and Naji for giving us their time this evening. This was incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, this has been recorded, so we'll clean it up and distribute it again so that we can watch it again. I'm certainly going to watch it again because I feel like there are so many great nuggets. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll all see each other on the water.